After that, Lin Zian went to Myo King's room and asked her to take a break from her entertainment and try the soup that she had prepared for her. When she opened the door, she was very surprised. Myo was sitting on the floor reading books. She told her mother that she needed to study hard, which made Lin very surprised. After that, we are shown the night temple again, which is surrounded by a full moon. Su was surprised that their Myo was not doing anything, but studying right in the middle of the night. Lin added that she had been studying with Xiao Feng all day today and returned a completely different person. She had heard Xiang Tian say that the new student had a high level of understanding. It seems that he was able to learn the basics without any problems in the first lesson. Perhaps this is what put pressure on Myo King. The man noted that it was high time for her to take up her head. I've been idling and lazy for so many years. He never thought that this guy would be good for anything. Su asked his wife if they had some extra spiritual herbs. Lin agreed, but did not understand what he was leading to. The man said that this guy just has a disgusting spiritual root. If they gave him a couple of these herbs, they might be able to keep Myo King motivated for a while. Lin smiled because she realized that he had a sharp tongue, but such a soft heart. She agreed to arrange everything. At the same time, she will attach some kind of servant to him to help him with the housework. Su waved his hand and said that she could do whatever she wanted. After that, they show us the swimming pool of Xiao Feng's courtyard, and the protagonist himself was there, and a certain girl went straight there. The protagonist held onto his shoulder and felt that his body was just heavy. He had the feeling that all the bones were crumbling now. Immediately, the girl knocked on the door. The protagonist quickly got up and opened the door and asked who she was. The girl replied that Mrs. Xian had sent her. She is here to serve him. He can call her Xiao Yu. The protagonist was surprised and asked what she was going to do here. Immediately, he realized that in his previous life he definitely did not have such a thing and blushed deeply embarrassed. He said that he was planning to swim after all, and it was somehow wrong. Xiao approached him and asked if he really thought it was wrong, or should she still help him with bathing, and at this question, she narrowed her eyes. From her words, the protagonist blushed even more and did not know what to say. He felt that there was clearly something wrong here. He had the feeling that they wanted to eat him. He threw her hand away and said that there was no need to help him. He is a cultivator of immortality, not some helpless child. In addition, a girl should not help a young man with bathing. Xiao Feng assured her that he would do fine on his own, so she could go do some chores around the house and started kicking her out, and she asked him to wait. He immediately closed the doors in front of her, and Yu noted that she did not think that he would be so clean. Therefore, she felt that she had come here for a reason and prepared special water for him and smiled. Then something happened and there was a flash. Immediately, the girl seemed to come to her senses and did not understand what had happened because she was heading to the young master's courtyard. The protagonist thought afterwards that he had definitely seen her look somewhere before. Immediately, he thought of Liu Hanyan and thought that it was her. He got into the water and was glad that he reacted in time. If I had hesitated even for a second, it would have been bad. He thought it was very dangerous to have a wife at the Mahayana stage, but he did not understand what she was doing here. Immediately, he felt that the water was very pleasant and did not understand why, and also that it literally oozed spiritual energy. He thought that Hanyan had prepared this bathroom for him and realized that she was still thinking about him and sat down and opposed to cultivate. After that, we are shown the Hanyan palace. Two servants were standing at the door. The first girl did not understand what happened and why the mistress was in such a bad mood. The other replied that she did not know, but added that the lady was already in such a state when she returned to the palace. In general, it's best not to bother her yet. Immediately, a certain sound thundered from inside, which surprised the girls. We are shown the floating snowflake palace itself, and Han used ice and froze part of everything. She did not understand why the protagonist could only reach the stage of Kai cultivation. She was very angry because she had spent the highest quality elixir on that bathroom. Another person would have already moved on to the stage of laying the foundations. She did not understand how much the heavens had deprived him of talent, and I didn't understand why she even spent such a valuable thing on him. He's not related to her in any way. He's a complete stranger. She felt that she probably didn't want to remain in debt to him for the improved cultivation technique. She just repaid him for it. After that, Su was surprised that the protagonist had moved to the stage of Kai improvement overnight. He replied that it was so, and all thanks to the herbs of the lady. Su thought about the fact that those herbs couldn't have such a stunning effect. Lin said that a breakthrough was good, of course, but he should not let self-confidence take over his mind, and he agreed. Xiang immediately appeared, who noted that Feng was not bad. He had heard that he had already managed to break through to the first stage of cultivation. The protagonist replied that he was just lucky, and Xiang was already standing next to him. Immediately, he grabbed the protagonist and noted that luck is also part of his strength. If you look at it that way, he's not so ordinary, and laughed. Feng also asked Xiang to be a little more gentle. He quickly let him go and apologized, because he forgets to control his strength, and he laughed and noted that everything was fine. The protagonist thought, because in this life he began to worship by combining 3 teachings. In the end, he will become even stronger than in his previous life. However, because of this, his cultivation should have slowed down decently. But somehow he was able to reach the first stage in just one night and did not understand what his wife had given him yesterday. Or maybe he suddenly awakened a talent for cultivation. 2 years have passed since then. Myo King has broken through to the 7th stage of cultivation. Sue noted that Myo is very talented, even though they tried to suppress her cultivation so that she could strengthen her foundations properly. Myo King was still able to break through to the void separation stage. The mother agreed with this, but the other guy is more worried. Sue asked her not to mention him because he was getting angry. Immediately, Myo came out and laughed and said that she had finally broken through to the next stage and asked where Brother Feng was. The protagonist bowed and congratulated his older sister on her successful breakthrough. Xiao Feng was at the 4th stage. Immediately, the girl was surprised and asked why he was still in the 4th stage of cultivation. The protagonist laughed and replied that he had no talent. Sue got angry and shouted that he had spent 2 whole years on him. With so many treasures, even a pig would have already reached the 6th stage of cultivation. Lin tried to calm her husband down and asked him to be calmer. The man said that he would leave here, because he was afraid that he would soon lose his temper and hit him. The wife noted that then it is worth returning home together. Immediately they disappeared and the protagonist asked why the master and mistress had left. The girl was delighted and replied that no one knows what is going on in the head of this old man. He should forget about it and have fun instead. The protagonist was surprised by her words and replied that he would probably practice more. Immediately, the girl shackled him, which made him even more surprised. Immediately she flew and dragged him along. She replied that nothing would happen to him if she missed a day of training. It's developing too slowly anyway. Instead, she would show him a beautiful place. The protagonist has already started to almost spit from the pitching and replied that then he accepts her offer. He did not expect that the technique from his previous life would be so slow. What did his wife feed him then that he could break through in just one night? Immediately, the girl shouted that she was speeding up, and he was surprised. She flew very fast and he asked her to slow down. Myo asked what he was afraid of, because she was with him. Immediately, she noticed something and decided to check it out. They quickly went down into the forest. The protagonist felt very bad because of the pitching, and Myo was surprised. There was a huge dead beast right next to them. The protagonist sat down to examine the beast and told the girl to look at this bite mark. It was he who proved fatal. Myo noted that it was a tamed beast of their infinity palace and did not understand who dared to attack it. The girl took out a blue ball and took it in her hand. Immediately, she shouted that they had to find him and summon Xiaobai from the ball. We are shown the pet Myo himself, who is still small. The girl told Xiaobai that they needed to find the killers of this beast. The protagonist noted that this wind wolf can match the strength of a master of the 5th stage. They might have to face a beast much stronger than this wolf. Myo asked him not to worry. This is the territory of the Infinity Palace. All the strong beasts have long been exterminated by her parents, and she can handle the rest herself. Immediately, Soyabai heard a sound and tensed up. He ran quickly and Myo grabbed the protagonist by the hand and told him to run, because it seems that Xiaobai smelled something. Immediately, she saw that Xiaobai had returned to his original form and was greatly surprised. The girl ran up to him and asked the wolf lion what he had found. They found an interesting picture. Everywhere on the field there were many bodies of dead wolves. Myo was shocked and didn't understand what the hell it was. At the same time, there was a snake's tail behind them, which was reaching for Myo. The protagonist managed to turn around and shouted at her to be careful. The snake tried to hit the girl, but he managed to grab her and defend himself. It was pretty hard for them and the protagonist asked her if she was okay. The girl coughed and agreed. Immediately, the snake hit Xiaobai and he broke through all the trees that flew by. The girl was shocked when she saw this and shouted the dog's name. He was injured and fell to the ground. The girl took out the ball and told him to come back. Then they got up and the protagonist pointed up with the words that someone was on top. A snake was flying at them, which was preparing to unleash abilities on them. The girl thought that he was pushing himself and decided to answer. Myo summoned the spiritual swords and they enveloped her. Immediately, the snake released its power and those raising their heads saw a huge green ball. There was a strong explosion. The protagonist felt that this was bad, because the snake emitted poisonous smoke. Myo began to fall and noted that she felt sick somehow. The protagonist began to panic and asked her not to lose consciousness. The protagonist stood in the haze of the explosion with Myo, and the snake was already preparing to attack. Xiao Feng shouted for her to deal with him. The girl got angry and replied that she was already afraid that he would not say it anymore. She quickly rushed at the snake and jumped up. After that, she fired a bunch of lightning bolts at her from all sides. From them, the snake twisted into a ball and Myo chained it. Then the girl went down and jumped near the protagonist. Myo thanked him for waking her up. Immediately, her legs began to wobble. The protagonist managed to catch her to support her and asked if she was okay. The girl agreed and explained that she just accidentally inhaled poisonous smoke. They need to get back to the palace as soon as possible and tell her parents what happened here. Immediately, a strong sound sounded, which even made the protagonist uncomfortable, and Myo got ready. The snake began to destroy the electric shackles and there was only one left. Myo was surprised, because her parents had told her that the animals of this forest were not capable of resisting this technique. The protagonist was also surprised by her words. The snake broke free and he realized that this beast was at the stage of laying the foundations. Myo stood in front of the protagonist and told him to step aside. Immediately, the snake tried to attack the girl, but she dodged, and at the same moment, she responded and hit his skin. She realized that it would not work. The skin of this beast is too strong. We need to come up with something else, and added that we need to aim at the eye. She quickly bounced off the ground. Then she jumped straight at the snake and ran while it was heading somewhere. After the snake rose and used some kind of force, from which the girl stopped. The girl was surprised when she realized that he had accelerated the spread of the poison in her body. Myo created a kind of scarlet ball around herself, and the snake was preparing to hit her. He quickly kicked it and it flew away. She fell to the floor and was just shocked and unchanged. The snake opened its mouth and was preparing to completely eat Myo. She realized that this would be her end. Right next to her, the snake stopped and was surprised as well as Myo. It was the protagonist who grabbed the snake by the tail and asked if he dared to ignore it. The girl was already very tired, and when she saw that Xiao Feng intervened, she began to cry. The protagonist was very tense and was preparing to lift the snake. He started to beat him up and then threw him out with the words to get out of here. And the snake flew dozens of meters away from them. Immediately, the protagonist approached the girl. He held out his hand to her and she told him that he needed to run. Xiao took her by the waist to lift her up, and holding her hands, he told her to send a signal for help. The girl fired a flash that went straight up. Myo apologized, because she thought it was all because of her. Xiao asked her not to worry about anything, because he would take care of everything. Then he gently put the girl down and felt the shaking of the ground. The protagonist looked back warily. He smiled and realized that the next round was coming. The snake immediately wanted to hit him with its tail, and he prepared to attack in response. He hit her and said that then he would take this great chance to practice. He hit her and then took his hand away and started laughing. The snake did not receive any damage at all, and the protagonist realized that he had broken his arm with his blow. The difference in their levels is simply enormous. Even though he shook him a little, it's nothing to him. Then he exhaled and was surprised. The serpent got ready and wanted to put a certain sphere into it. The protagonist realized that he needed to act and ran straight at the snake. He quickly hit the snake, which caused it to spit blood. The protagonist exhaled quite a lot, because he still managed to. Immediately, the snake tried to attack the protagonist. He struck with his strength that the earth began to collapse. The protagonist was not under attack and the snake was surprised. It turned out that Xiao jumped on the snake, and the snake turned around and saw him. Immediately, the snake began to panic and tried to throw off the protagonist. He was spinning very fast and thus wanted to destroy him. It was very hard for the protagonist to resist and called him a bastard. He decided to use the force and told the snake to try it. Xiao immediately stuck his fingers into the snake, which caused it to scream violently. He quickly threw him down and the protagonist fell. But Xiao managed to regroup and he somersaulted a couple of times so as not to take a lot of damage. He hit a tree and noted that he had just left a serious wound on it. The snake rushed forward and the protagonist noted that this was not enough. Immediately, someone intervened and shouted for the damn beast to die. In an instant, the green aura cut the snake in two. It was Lin, Myo King's mother, who flew at them and shouted their names. She noted that fortunately she managed to, but the protagonist had already begun to lose consciousness looking at Lin. At the same time, I show us the Hanyan Temple. There she cultivated and did her own business. She thought it was weird. She had reached the critical point of cultivating the ice heart technique and for some reason felt some excitement. After all, this is an improved version of the technique. There should be no hidden dangers. She checked everything herself. She thought that she should visit that guy. After all, she hadn't seen him in a couple of years. She wondered if he had made any progress. Leaving the temple, she said that it was just to sort things out. She doesn't owe him anything anymore. Immediately, she saw a flash that flew out of the temple. She saw a familiar character, the Taoist Guang Shendao, who was flying somewhere. Han asked Guang Shendao's brother to wait, and he turned around in surprise. The girl flew up to him and asked if he was heading to the Infinity Palace and thought that something had happened. Guang asked if she remembered how Master Kaini had accepted a new student a couple of years ago. A couple of minutes ago, he received a message saying that this student was seriously injured and is now in critical condition. Master Kayane asked him to help him. Immediately, Han quickly flew forward, which already broke through the sonic velocity several times. Guang was greatly surprised and only managed to pronounce the name Han. After that, Myo is shown to us, who was also injured and lost consciousness. After that, a certain girl appeared who asked the second brother how Myo King was doing. The guy replied that she had several fractures and was poisoned by snake venom. However, he had already dealt with the poison. He'll be back on his feet in a couple of days. The problem now is something else. Their brand new younger brother. Immediately, the door began to open. It was Xiang who entered Myo's room. The second brother greeted him and asked how things were going. The girl also asked if Xiao was all right. Xiang was angry and replied that the wound was too serious. Master and mistress, even by joining forces, can only keep him breathing. The girl asked Xiang not to worry, because their master had already turned to Master Guang Shendao. Xiang turned around and said that he would immediately go in search of medicinal herbs on the backside of the mountain. Immediately, a certain yellow card flew forward. She hit the door and closed it right in Xiang's face. The second one noted that the mountain was too huge and asked what he was going to find there alone. The girl noted that the second was right, and that Xiang needed to calm down. Xiang shouted how he could calm down and just do nothing. Immediately, the second one asked him to wait, because he realized that someone had arrived. 2 flashes of different colors appeared in this temple. Han Yan appeared first. Guan Shendao was behind her. He was breathing heavily and asked his sister to wait, because he couldn't keep up with her and was too tired. Immediately, all 3 of them came out and greeted them. Xiang was surprised when he saw Han Yan and asked what she was doing here. The head did not answer his question, but simply asked where Xiao Feng was now. Xiang was surprised and replied that he was now in the hall of the master and mistress. Immediately, the 2 simply disappeared. Xiang asked their master, and the master of the floating snowflake palace invited them, but the second brother did not know this. At this time, we are shown how Lin helped Xiao Feng. Su stood by and told his wife that it was his turn now and she should rest for a while. Lin asked her husband not to worry, she still had the strength. But Xiao Feng's breathing continues to weaken and asked when Master Guang Shendao would arrive. Immediately, they appeared behind them and said that they had already arrived. Su was glad that Guang had finally arrived, and when he saw Han Yan, he was surprised and asked what she was doing here. Han walked behind Guang, who was nervous for some reason. The girl said that it was better to focus on the treatment, but Guang and Su were surprised, and he noted that Han likes to command so much. Then he looked at the protagonist and was surprised. He was just shocked when he examined it. Han saw Guang's terrible reaction and asked what was wrong with Xiao. He turned around and decided to be honest. The protagonist has very serious wounds. All his meridians are damaged. It can be cured, but it takes a lot of money. He then looked at Xiao and asked if it was worth spending so many expensive resources on a student with such mediocre talent. Han started to panic and said that she would provide as many herbs as needed. Su intervened and said that he was his master, so he had to take care of him. He has plenty of such resources. The girl indignantly asked, since he understands that he is his master, then why would he let him get hurt like that? Su wanted to say something, but he didn't have time. Lin shouted for them to stop arguing. First of all, they need to take care of Xiao Feng. She asked Guan Shendao to do everything possible. He replied that since they were saying so, they had nothing to add. And then he said that he was starting to act now. After 3 hours had passed, a huge aura was flying out from the temple. Guan said that now his life is not in danger. Han agreed with him and noted that they were really lucky this time and thanked Guang Shingato. He laughed and replied that it was not worth the thanks. Immediately, realizing her words, he was outraged, because it had nothing to do with luck. They spent so many treasures, and even chose all the most expensive ones. Well, of course, they are the masters of their palaces. They can afford to throw away such elixirs. Then he said that he had a lot to do and would go. But in fact, he thought that they had spent so much money on an untalented student. The very thought that he will never have such riches makes his heart ache. He should get out of here as soon as possible. Han Yan said it was time for her to leave too. Su asked her to wait. He asked why she was helping Junior Feng so much. The girl turned around and replied that he had once done him a favor. Therefore, she decided to repay her debt to him. After that, I show us the battlefield where the corpses lay. The protagonist was walking forward right next to all this and didn't understand anything. He saw a lot of dead bodies and wondered only one question: where did he get to? Immediately he heard a cry for help and looking in that direction realized that the sound was from there. He saw a picture that Xiao Feng had killed someone. We are shown an already familiar guy who just said the name of the protagonist. The other Xiao Feng looked evil and laughed. Then he tore the sword from him and told him to die. The guy's lifeless body fell to the ground. The protagonist realized that this is him from a previous life, which means that this is all a dream. And now he looks like he's lost his mind. Immediately, someone from heaven told this brat to stop, which made the protagonist look up. It was the other masters who levitated in the air and said that he was completely distraught. He not only killed his brother, but also his master Su. He's a fratricide demon. The protagonist, touching his face, was surprised by their words. He assured that he had not killed anyone and this was a mistake. Someone asked how dare he deny everything. There is so much demonic energy in his body right now that no other evidence is even needed. They will kill him and clear Master Su's good name. The protagonist only repeated that he was innocent and clutched his head. It was as if the demonic side had won in him and he grabbed his sword and said he would kill everyone. After that, he started laughing and replied that it was him and asked what was the point. He pointed his finger at them and added that no one would even know about it because he would kill them all too. The masters told them to execute him. They immediately put all their strength into it and a strong explosion occurred. The protagonist thought that in a previous life, when he was very vulnerable due to the impending transition to the next stage, a demonic spirit was able to enter his body and he was forced to coexist with it. After the explosion, the protagonist flew up and asked, "And this is all that the great sect of the Star Interrogator of the Sky is capable of?" and laughed. The protagonist began to fly away and the head said rather after him, "They can't hold back, they need to grab him, and it doesn't matter if he's alive or dead." Looking at this, the protagonist thought that by coincidence, he was able to invade his mind and drove him crazy in an instant. And later he killed his master with his own hands. Myo King poisoned his mind for almost half of the time of his previous life. However, this time, he screamed that he would not be spared and woke up. Myo was standing next to his bed, who started crying and asked if he would never forgive her. She burst into tears and said it was all her fault. He can beat her up for it, she won't even resist. The protagonist asked her to calm down because it wasn't about her. "I just had a nightmare." The other girl was surprised and asked what the noise was. Immediately, she saw that Xiao Feng had woken up. She screamed from the bottom of her heart that Mr. Feng had woken up. The protagonist asked how long he had been asleep. Myo replied that he had been sleeping for 10 whole days. The protagonist was surprised by her words and looked at her in disbelief. Su and Lin immediately began to approach him, who noted that he had really woken up and asked how he was feeling. The protagonist saw them and started to get out of bed to greet them. The master said that there was no need to get up. They just came to check on him. Lin bent down to thank him for saving them from Myo King. If it wasn't for him, she would blame herself for the rest of her life. The protagonist smiled and replied that it was not worth thanking him. He had only fulfilled his duty as a disciple of their Infinity Palace. In his previous life, he was persecuted by the entire sect for killing his master. Then he would never have believed that Ms. Lin would thank him for anything. Su asked his wife to take Myo King away from here, because he needed to talk to Xiao Feng. Myo didn't understand why. She also wanted to talk to him. She asked her father not to even think about scolding Xiao Feng. Lin explained to her daughter that her father just wanted to thank Xiao Feng. She knows that palace masters need to keep their face. They can wait outside. After that, the protagonist asked the master what he wanted to talk to him about. Su was wondering what his connection was with Master Guanghan. The protagonist was surprised and asked why he was asking. Su replied that as soon as Guanghan's sister became aware of his injuries, she immediately rushed here. She said that this was how she repaid the debt for his service and he was wondering what she was talking about. The protagonist was surprised and asked if she had come here specifically for this. He immediately told the master that in fact this service was insignificant. Even he would never have thought that she still remembered it. As he said before, he and Master Guanghan met when his village was destroyed by demonic wolves. Then she looked like an ordinary girl, and when she was attacked by one of the wolves, the protagonist rushed into battle and told her to be careful. He told her to run away from here as soon as possible, and he would detain them. Xiao told her to run again. If she didn't run away now, it would be too late. The girl noted that he helped her. She would repay him later. The protagonist, looking at her, was surprised and asked what she was talking about, and thought that she was crazy with fear. Xiao Feng could not have imagined that she was the great master of the sect of the Starry Inquirer of Heaven. Su realized that even though he was immortal then, he had the courage to rush to her aid. It was a decent thing to do. The protagonist laughed and thanked the master. Fortunately, in a previous life, that's how he met his future wife, which means it can't be called a lie. Su said that she had spent very expensive treasures on him this time, so she should be properly thanked the next time they met. The protagonist asked the master not to worry. He will remember what she did for him. He understood him and told him to rest and that he would not torment him anymore. The protagonist thanked the master. As he left, he thanked Myo King and said goodbye. The protagonist laughed and realized that after all, Su really does not know how to show his true feelings. Immediately, the protagonist somersaulted and sat down in a pose. He noted that thanks to the expensive gifts from Liu Hanyan, his cultivation would accelerate significantly. Help is good, but he should be able to protect himself. Looking at his hand, he noted that his cultivation level was at the 5th stage of Kai cultivation. It just so happens that the 5th stage of Kai cultivation is the threshold for the pen drop technique. Finally, he can go there. After that, it was the dead of night. The protagonist jumped into the Naruto through the trees and moved quickly. Then he ran to the cliff. He changed into ninja clothes and noted that it must be here. Then the protagonist caught his breath and immediately rushed down. He flew straight into the depths with a smile on his face. Then he saw a cave in a crevice with a tree and said he had found it. In flight, he used the pen drop technique and landed very carefully on a tree branch. Looking into the cave, he was delighted because everything was like last time. He easily entered the fire in his hand to illuminate the cave, and he went straight there, saying that if he hadn't reached the 5th stage of the Kai cultivation stage, he wouldn't have been able to get here. After passing on, he saw a skeleton that was wrapped in a kind of robe. Next to it was a magic sword and inscriptions on the ground. The protagonist knew that this was the legacy of a master at the Mahayana stage. He left it behind when he hid here from some enemies of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect. Whoever receives his legacy will undoubtedly gain great power. The protagonist asked that Myo King imagined everything like that. Immediately, he hurled his fire directly at this skeleton and a small explosion occurred. Myo King's bones began to burn. The protagonist created a new fire and asked why he was silent. Well, then nothing will stop him from staying here and burning his bones in the end. Immediately, someone asked him to wait. A ghost from the bones appeared and asked how he knew about this place. He believed that the protagonist was a disciple of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer. Then it turns out that they come from the same sect. Immediately, the protagonist threw fire at him, but he dodged and was surprised. Zio told Myo King to just look at himself. What a pitiful sight it is. Once, indeed, he was a master of the Mahayana stage, but now everything is different. He's just a pathetic spirit who's trying to beg for mercy. He asked why they didn't drop this useless chatter. He would just finally send him to heaven. The protagonist immediately threw 6 yellow cards at him. The ghost realized that these were talismans of soul destruction. They were created to fight spirits like him. Chanky assumed that this was what he had come for from the very beginning. Immediately, the ghost began to evade all these talismans. One got right into Chanky and he noted that there were no hard feelings between them and asked why he was doing this to him. The protagonist was surprised and asked again, and then answered, although he does not remember it, but once they were very familiar with each other. The protagonist threw 4 more talisman cards at him and the ghost realized that if everything continued like this, then his soul would simply be destroyed here and therefore he needed to escape. Immediately, Chanky decided to act and approach the wall. With great force, he pushed off from the wall. He flew past all the talismans at high speed, spilled past the protagonist. Chanky said that he would leave him for today. However, whoever he was, he would definitely find him and take revenge. Immediately, the ghost stopped because he saw the seal at the exit. He tried to fly through, but hit the seal. The protagonist smiled at this. He turned around and asked how he liked the formation of Isking's soul shackles. This time, he prepared himself properly. He proudly said that he would end Myo King today. In his previous life, it almost completely absorbed his consciousness. It was because of him that he suffered for so many years and fell into insanity from time to time. The ghost got angry and said that he was just a boy at the stage of Kai cultivation. Chanky rushed at him and shouted that he would devour him, calling him a brat. The protagonist stood still and just smiled. The protagonist summoned a sword that cuts through many spirits, which was lying on the sideline. Immediately, the sword flew straight into the hands of the protagonist. The latter quickly grabbed him and cut the spirit into 2 parts. Chanky was surprised and asked why he was able to use a sword that cuts spirits. Immediately, the protagonist used the shackles that appeared around the ghost. The ghost realized that he was shackled by the shackles of the Starry Sky Inquirer, which means the protagonist is from this sect. The protagonist told him that he had guessed right. The ghost began to be destroyed and shouted that even if his body and soul were destroyed, he will find it and take it with him. Immediately, the protagonist put a needle into the ghost. Chanky realized that it was the needle of the Wandering Soul sect. The protagonist also decided to use a fairy. Seeing the seals above him, he began to say that the sutra of the heart of the sect was Wuxian. Buddha's nature is completely pure. It exists from the very beginning, but it lives and does not die. She is unshakable and capable of creating everything. The ghost screamed for the protagonist to stop and listen to him. The protagonist was surprised and asked what he wanted to say. The ghost disappearing said that he is sure that the protagonist understands how many treasures the masters of the Mahayana stage can have. If he spares him and frees him, he will show him where his treasures are kept. The protagonist thought about it and replied that it sounded quite tempting. Chanky smiled and added that if he spared his life, all his wealth would go to him. As his master said, the sea exists only because of the rivers that flow into it. In order to achieve high results, you need a lot of expensive treasures. He was thinking that he needed to buy some more time. He's going to be free of these damn shackles soon. The protagonist glared at him and replied that the ghost had made a mistake in something. He already knows where all his treasures are. He would go after them as soon as he was done with him. Immediately, he used destruction and an explosion occurred. The ghost's particles scattered all over the cave and the protagonist was surprised. He stretched out his hand and realized that something inside his body had begun to absorb Myo King's spiritual energy. A kind of transparent flower appeared on his hand. After that, he changed a little and turned blue. After a moment, it seemed to fly apart and there was a small flash. The protagonist did not understand what kind of lotus flower it was. In his previous life, when Myo King almost captured his consciousness, he was saved by this particular flower, but then it was just an unopened bud, not a whole flower. He thought that perhaps it was thanks to him that he was able to move into the past, but he'll figure it out later. And now to the main thing. He smiled and wanted to see what kind of gift the bastard had left him. He doesn't know what this book is made of, but his flame didn't damage it in any way. Taking it, he said that now all modern sects use jade tablets. Only some ancient sects kept paper writings. This treasure must be kept by him. Then, taking the robe itself, he noted that it was excellent. He thinks it's also some kind of treasure with protective properties. We can't have this lying here and just gathering dust. After that, he found a ring for storing items and it was all good for him, which made the protagonist smile a lot. Immediately, the sword caught fire and flew up. He flew right up to the protagonist, which surprised him. Zio noted that a sword that cuts through many spirits is not very pleasant to hold in your hands. It can be called the sword of misfortune because it was born of an endless number of murders. This blade hides incredible power. Naturally, many people wanted to possess it. However, as soon as it fell into someone's hands, the sword, which cut through many spirits, began to suck out the life energy of its owner. In the end, everyone turned into slaves of this blade. It was the same with Myo King, who once became the owner of this blade. The protagonist laughed and turned to the blade. He hoped that they would never see each other again. Zio immediately decided to act and pushed off the floor. At high speed, the protagonist began to run away, but the sword followed him and stood in front of him, and the protagonist was very surprised. The sword said that the protagonist smells delicious, and Zio was even more surprised. The sword that cuts through many spirits took human form in the form of a girl, and she said that the protagonist's soul smells very delicious and asked if she could take a bite. The protagonist thought about it with a smile on his face and replied that he was too weak to become her food right now. She asked if she could wait a little while until he got stronger and gained spiritual strength. She might even follow him. In fact, the protagonist panicked because he thought it was very dangerous. This blade can drain him in the blink of an eye. The girl was surprised by his words and asked if he wanted to say that he had become her master and why did he think that such a weakling could become her master. Doesn't he think that just eating it would be much easier? The protagonist replied that she was probably right. But he was more beautiful than that skeleton in the corner, and it would obviously be more fun with him. The girl replied that it made sense. She started yawning and agreed to follow him, but first she wants to sleep. She added that they had agreed that when she woke up, he would let her, but before she could finish, she laughed angrily. The protagonist looked at the ring and noted that this time he also had to rely on this beauty, and in general, we can say that his outing was successful. There were already hundreds of high-quality spiritual stones inside this ring. Immediately, he remembered that he had forgotten about the time count and began to quickly escape from the cave. After that, we are shown the city of Bingyan Northern Empire. We are shown the auction. The next lot is a protective dragon talisman. This jade talisman was created by a Mahayana stage master for his younger students. It does not require spiritual powers to activate and can protect 3 times from the techniques of the master of the immortal infant stage. The starting price is 500 spiritual stones of the highest quality. All the men in the hall noted that it would be useful for the younger students at most and it was too expensive. This treasure is not suitable for masters, but as a gift to younger students. It's too expensive. They did not know any masters who would buy such a thing for their student. The auctioneer drooped and replied that these auctions already start with 500 spiritual stones. This is a very good offer. Immediately, someone offered 600 and the girl's eyes lit up. The master of the palace of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer offered 600 stones. There are no more bets. The treasure goes to Master Guang Han. Han smiled, because she thought that this thing would be useful for the protagonist.